Hello everyone, my name is Frank DeMora and I'm the author of the book The Last Chronicles of Planet Earth. I'd like to welcome you today. I'm going to be discussing some really important issues here, and I'm hoping that once you see it that you'll be obliged to pass it on to others, because it's going to affect not only you, it's going to affect the people that you send it to, I guarantee it. Now, as I said, I'm the author of this book, The Last Chronicles of Planet Earth, and it is a documentary on Bible prophecy and current events. But unlike the other authors out there, you're going to get the book from me for free. All you have to do is go to my website. You see the drop down at the bottom of this page here. And once you're at my site, you'll look for that link that will be below the book. Click the link, and you'll get the book download today for free. There's almost 39 years of work in that book proving that what Jesus Christ warned us for this generation is coming to pass without a doubt. And I want to cover just a portion of what he said today. Now I'm going to start off with famine, because this is one of the most critical, because if you have famine, and people are not eating, then you have people dying, and of course that's critical. And Jesus gave us insights to what was going to be happening in the last days. Now, if you read the book of Revelation, you would see this black horse. Now, the black horse signifies famine, and the rider, the conservator of food. He has the balances in his hand, and many millions upon millions of people will be dying during the tribulation period. It's a period of time that you do not want to be involved in. And the only way that you can find yourself in this period of time is the rejection of Jesus Christ. And I don't care who you are. I don't care what you believe right now. You have to understand what Jesus Christ said. And if he said, nobody's going to go to the Father except through me, then obviously you should pay attention to that, because if he is correct, and by his words and by his warnings, he demonstrates that he is who he says he is. Now, I want to cover, first of all, I'm going to bring in some prophecies here where the Lord warned us, and then we'll go on and I'll show you some documentation in this area proving that what Christ had to say is actually coming to pass. Now, in Revelation chapter 7, verse 16, the Lord talks about this. He talks about the water shortages, about the hunger and the heat that's going to be coming on this earth. Take a look. Revelation chapter 7, verse 16, never again will they hunger, never again will they thirst. The sun will not beat upon them, nor any scorching heat. In Revelation 16:8, the fourth angel poured out his bowl on the sun, and the sun was given power to scorch people with fire. Now, if Christ warned us that the last days signs would be like birth pangs, and you can see Mark 13:8, and we're seeing those birth pangs now, you should pay attention to what the Lord says. So, in these verses here, we know when he's talking about the people aren't going to hunger anymore, and the people aren't going to thirst, and the sun's not going to beat on them, what we see in the book of Revelation is the people coming out of the tribulation by not accepting the Antichrist, not bowing down to the Antichrist, not receiving his mark, which we know from Revelation chapter 13 will be placed on the right hand or in the forehead. And so these people went through the tribulation, or part of it. They experienced the hunger. They experienced the thirst and the heat, the scorching heat pouring down on them. And this is where the Lord said none of these things are going to affect them anymore, because they were martyred for the Lord. They're in heaven now. And this is a very, very crucial item to comprehend here, what the Lord is telling us. Because on the flip side, for those who receive the mark of the beast, not only will you suffer hunger and thirst and the sun beating down and scorching you with this massive amount of heat, but on the rejection of Jesus Christ, you're going to have eternal fire forever, not just during the tribulation period. Let's move on. Now here again in the book of Revelation, this time in chapter 6, I'm going to read verse 5 through 6. It says this, And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, Come and see. And I beheld, and lo, a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. And see thou hurt not the oil and the wine. So anyone who's read the New Testament would have read the story that Jesus gave about the people who were going to work in the field. They were going into the field one at a time to work all day long, and they were going to get a denarius. This was a wage that they were paid back at the time that Jesus was alive. And so what we know from Revelation, the scriptures that you just heard, that during the tribulation period, obviously the cost of food is going to skyrocket because people are going to be working all day long for a limited amount of food. Now, when it's talking about a measure of wheat for a penny, you're looking at maybe enough food for one person, like a quart of wheat for one person. That's one meal, not a family, just for one person. Hardly enough for that one person. And then also a little bit more barley, but still, you'll be working all day long for this small, very small amount of food. And the reason why is because if you have less food, it shoots the prices right through the roof. And obviously there are different circumstances that would cause the food to skyrocket, and I'm going to be covering these. Now, the first thing that I wanted to show you is there's going to be some scorching sun. We know that. I just showed you 2 of the scriptures that the Lord pointed out to us. The drought, the scorching heat that will be coming. So, are you watching the news? If you're not watching the news, you should be watching the news. You should be paying attention to what the sun is doing. Because not only did the Lord tell us that we were going to be scorched on this earth, or at least those that will be left in the tribulation, we're in the birth pangs of it now, but the major portion of this harsh heat that will be coming down upon this earth will be coming down during the tribulation period. So keep that in mind, because the scorching heat is one element that is going to affect the food. But I'm going to center in first on what Albert Einstein said. Now, I know that the older generation, my generation, knows who Albert Einstein was from school. And I'm not even sure what they're teaching in school anymore. I'm not sure what these young kids know. I'm not even sure if they know Albert Einstein. They should. But I know that many of them don't. But Einstein was a brilliant scientist. And this is something that he said that is very, very interesting. And it had to do with bees. Look what he said. I'm going to quote him. If the bee disappeared off the surface of the globe, then man would only have 4 years of life left. No more bees, no more pollination, no more plants, no more animals, no more man. Now, in my book, I have page after page after page, and I'm not kidding when I say this. Hundreds of accounts, news accounts. And I can't even put them all in my book because my book would be outrageously large. But I do have the documentation, all of it, that you can get today by going to my website, as I said, for free to read it. But I want to play some videos, give you some recent information about the bee population dying. Because when the bee population dies, and Albert Einstein said, one of the smartest people in the world, that when it dies, you only have about 4 years left. And we're in the birth pangs of the bees dying off. So if they continue to die off the way they are now, by the time the people of this planet get into the tribulation, it's going to be just like Albert Einstein said. The bees would be disappeared, and they'd only have 4 years left. And what happens? Balance of food. The black horse rider, okay? And the one who holds the balances for food. Very, very important. So let's Take a look.
Perhaps no other insect is more vital to the health of the global produce than the honeybee. In fact, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, about 1/3 of the average human diet comes from plants pollinated by bees. Over the past decade, scientists have been tracking an inexplicable and baffling die-off of millions of bees. The phenomenon is known as colony collapse disorder, or CCD. And just last week, the USDA released its annual report on the American honeybee population and found that nearly a quarter of bees in managed honeybee colonies perished this past winter. Now, while this percentage is an improvement from previous years, the continuing mass death of bees is nowhere near sustainable. It could have lasting ramifications to our food supply and ecosystems. But a growing body of research appears to have unlocked the causes of CCD. And unsurprisingly, it's very likely the fault of mankind. So to discuss what a world without bees would look like, as well as what we can do to stop CCD, I'm joined now by Tiffany Finnick-Hayes, campaign manager at Food Futures, and Allison Gillespie, author of the book Hives in the City, Keeping Honeybees Alive in an Urban World. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining me. Tiffany, let's start with you. Outline some of the major conclusions of the USDA report and how it compared to last year and the previous year's CCD.
Sure. So what we saw in this report is that almost a quarter of the bees died off this past winter, and the report really glossed over the main culprit for this bee decline, which is pesticides. There's a systemic class of pesticides called neonicotinoids. The European Union has placed a 2-year moratorium on 3 of the most widely used neonicotinoids in the European Union, but the EPA has delayed action until 2018. And so this class of pesticides is chemically related to nicotine, and it impacts the bees' ability to forage, navigate, get to their hive, and also makes them more susceptible to diseases, pests, and other stressors.
Break this down a little bit more, Allison, how the neonicotinoid works, confuses the bee from preventing them to go back to their hive, or what exactly does it do?
Well, there's significant evidence that it affects the honeybees on several levels, and also it may be affecting native bees and other beneficial insects. One of the things is that it's gathered by the bees and taken back to their hive, and may be accumulating over time. It may be disabling their ability to navigate, which is essential to a bee's livelihood. They need to know how to get back to their hive mates. It may also, there is some evidence that it may also be disabling their ability to do their own health care and take care of themselves. So it's toxins on several levels.
And Harvard just kind of confirmed that this is the most likely contributing factor. What else was concluded in that report?
Well, I think the report, the people who wrote the report came to the conclusion that, or have stated that, yes, hive mites are a factor. A lot of people talk about the varroa mite and some other pathogens and other diseases. There's no doubt that there are about 8 factors in the honeybee's decline. But the researchers were very vocal about saying that they feel that neonicotinoids are making bees more vulnerable to those problems. Bees have been declining since World War II dramatically, but the most dramatic declines have really been since the late 90s. And neonicotinoids were introduced in the late 90s. A lot of beekeepers are saying, maybe we need to push the pause button and do more research before we introduce these chemicals.
Right. Tiffany, even though number of bee deaths have slightly dropped over the last few years, how has CCD already impacted global agriculture, food, and really what would a world without bees look like?
Right, so bees contribute $15 billion to the U.S. economy and $217 billion to the world economy. So they're responsible for 1 out of 3 bites of food we eat on a daily basis to 2/3 of the food crops we eat on a daily basis as well. So they're extremely important to all of the food that we're consuming. And the thing is, in the U.S., agriculture has completely shifted. So a lot of the monocultures that we are very dependent on in the U.S., corn, soybeans, wheat, canola, all of those seeds are pre-treated in neonicotinoids. So 94 to 99% of the corn seeds are pre-treated in neonicotinoids, and the vast majority of those other seeds that are big monocultures are also pre-treated with neonicotinoids. So we really need to reimagine how we think about agriculture in this country, moving away from monocultures that are doused in pesticides and looking at sustainable organic agriculture.
I don't think people realize how serious this issue is. I mean, they don't understand how essential bees are to life. Allison, Have giant pesticide corporations, Monsanto, Syngenta, responded to these allegations, and if so, how?
Well, I think rather than try to speak for those corporations, I would reframe the question like this. I think that people are often thinking these problems are happening far away in some farm field distant that's not touching their life. But what's really evident is that, especially from the last USDA report, but other reports and anecdotal evidence from beekeepers in cities like I interviewed, you see that beekeepers on the very local level are all experiencing this everywhere. In Manhattan, in your suburban neighborhood, undeniably, every beekeeper around you in every neighborhood in the U.S. can relate these experiences of these die-offs. So that's a very big crisis. I think it saturates pretty much not just agriculture, but even our local neighborhoods. Tree companies, lawn companies are all using these chemicals.
But at the same time, you can't discount the enormous power and influence, lobbying influence that these companies wield on our federal government. And also, I mean, the fact that Monsanto bought out Biologics, that bee research firm, a couple of years ago, I mean, they claim that it's for research because they want to prevent CCD. I mean, I just can't think that they have altruistic means here. Comments on that?
I think the takeaway message is that there needs to be a little more time to investigate these chemicals. What people don't really understand readily is that neonicotinoids are game changers. They're systemics, which means that when you treat that plant, the chemical remains with that plant for that plant's entire life. If it's an annual, perennial sometimes. If it's a woody plant, like a shrub, evidence shows as long as 6 years, that chemical stays in the nectar, in the floral resources for 6 years after you treat a tree, or in some cases 3 years after you treat a tree, or soil. Insects that visit are ingesting that chemical.
Amazing. Tiffany, I have to ask you about robo-bees. I don't know if you guys have heard about this. Absolutely insane. Real technology being developed, once again, by Harvard, that would actually use tiny robots to pollinate plants. I mean, is this what we're looking for as a serious solution to CCD?
Right. I mean, so technology has helped us in a variety of ways, but never has it been able to be as good as nature. So we can't just use something else to take their place, and we really need to look at neonicotinoids, which are the main contributor to why bees are dying, and solve that problem to protect bees that are already in our ecosystem.
And Allison, let's talk about your book, and let's talk about non-robotic solutions here. I mean, of course, on a federal level, these companies could really do things, and on a government level, we can't depend on that. We have to really be proactive here. What can we do? We have about a minute left to prevent this.
I think the diversity of things for bees to eat, flowers that have not been treated, pressuring your local nurseries to please sell flowers that are not treated and to label them that way, and then plant them to bloom throughout the entire season. Asking people in agriculture settings to plant flowers that bloom just for the flower's sake. Because 85% of the world's plants depend on pollination. This is bigger than agriculture. This is everything that's growing. 85% of the world's plants and trees.
Amazing. We just have to be invested in our local ecosystems. You guys, thank you so much, both of you, for coming on. Everyone check it out, Hives in the City. Really appreciate you guys' time.
Today on Earth Focus, many of our food crops depend on honeybees for pollination, but bees are disappearing, and now there is new evidence why. Coming up on Earth Focus. Honeybees, the essential pollinators for many of our major crops, have been dying off in massive numbers since 2006, and they are continuing to die. This threatens our food supply and can affect the U.S. economy, where 1 in 12 jobs depend on agriculture.
Bees really are the underpinning of an entire agricultural system. And when you pull out that underpinning or that pin, you begin to see the collapse of an entire agricultural system.
I think we're at that tipping point. I think we're 1 or 2 years away from disaster.
Evidence is growing that a new class of pesticides, called neonicotinoids, may be accelerating bee death. Pesticides the Environmental Protection Agency allowed on the market without adequate testing and despite warnings by its own scientists that they are toxic to bees. These pesticides are now used on most U.S. crops, including almost all American corn. EPA says there is no evidence to show they cause bee death if properly used. But environmentalists disagree and want neonicotinoids banned until adequate safety tests are done. With the government slow to act, and as neonicotinoid sales reap billions for industry, bees continue to die.
One out of every 3 bites of food we put in our mouths is directly dependent on honey.
That includes crops like strawberries, zucchini, apples, cherries, blueberries, cucumbers, and pumpkins. It also includes forage and hay crops that support the dairy and meat industry. Pollination is essential to local economies. California's almond industry is an example.
Almonds here are the cash crop in the state. We grow them for consumption here, and they're exported abroad. Now, almonds rely exclusively on honeybees to produce that nut each year. In fact, now it's over $3 billion a year business. Without bees, almond processors don't exist. Without bees, the ability to transport those around the globe doesn't exist. That entire food chain, from the bee to the beekeeper, to the food processor, to the trucker, all of those points of our current food system come back to the bee.
What if the bees vanish? Experts can imagine U.S. growers will be confined to just 3 crops: wheat, rice, and corn. Crops that don't require bees for pollination. And the impact on the economy and the consumer could be profound. Declines in bee populations are not new. In the U.S., they've been slowly decreasing for some time. In the last 60 years, the number of honeybee colonies in the U.S. fell by 45%. The EPA says the prevailing theory among the global scientific and regulatory communities is that declines in the health of honeybees in general are related to complex interactions between multiple stressors, including inadequate food sources, diseases, habitat loss, bee management practices, as well as pesticides.
In the past 6 years, we've lost somewhere between 4.5 million and 12 million colonies.
Around 2006, U.S. beekeepers reported something new, something they've never seen before: sudden massive bee deaths that came to be called colony collapse disorder.
Colony collapse disorder is a situation where you have a handful of bees left and a queen normally, or nothing, and a lot of young brood. The queen's still trying to lay, but the adults have all disappeared and flew off, going away.
The basic foragers that go out and bring the pollen back to the hive and keep the sustainability of the hive going, we're not returning to the hives.
Typically, if a hive dies, there'll be some remnants in the hive of a few scraggler bees, or you'll see some brood, and these were just wiped clean.
The first to call attention to colony collapse disorder in the States was David Hackenberg, one of about 600 U.S. commercial pollinators. Every year, he trucks his 3,000 beehives cross-country to pollinate crops from California to Maine.
The fall of '06, with good-looking beehives in October, and trucked these bees south. 3 weeks later, I'm back down there, same location where we unloaded 400 hives of bees 3 weeks before that. Got in this bee yard and started looking at these bees, and there's nobody home. I mean, there's, out of 400 and a couple hives, there's only 30 some that really even looked like a beehive anymore. If you got empty boxes, where'd the bees go?
I've seen it in my own operation. I've seen a significant decline in the number of colonies that I'm able to keep alive, and my honey crop this past season was the lowest in 36 years. And it reflects what's going on nationally.
According to an annual survey conducted by representatives from the U.S. Department of Agriculture and Apiary Inspectors of America, 1 out of every 3 U.S. honeybee colonies was lost during the winter of 2010-2011. But some beekeepers say the losses are much higher.
Our losses over the whole year are running anywhere from 50 to 80%. Unsustainable. If you're strictly a honey producer and this is your job, you can't survive, and they aren't surviving.
Why are USDA reports so low? It could be because the online survey was based on data reported by only 20% of U.S. beekeepers, and because it included only winter and not full-year losses.
That's a very narrow snapshot of when bees die. Now, when we look at that full picture, we understand that bee losses are substantial and continue on that downward trend.
EPA also has an online reporting system for bee loss, but beekeeper Tom Theobald calls it a sham because state regulators who oversee pesticide use don't have to report bee incidents. He says reported incidents don't remain in the records, giving EPA the defense that few incidents are reported. Other EPA critics say that bee incidents are either not entered into the database or are sanitized by management. When asked to comment, EPA issued a statement saying, "We are aware of no instance in which states have withheld pesticide incidence data." The agency says it has worked extensively with pesticide health and safety organizations to provide objective, science-based information about pesticides, and that we are handling incident reports in a responsible, transparent manner, and we encourage incident reporting.
It's my experience that the working level people in the EPA, for the most part, want to do the proper thing. They want to carry out their responsibilities. I think what we're seeing is a massive failure at the management level, and I think it's time to remove some of these people from their jobs.
Colony collapse disorder is not confined to the U.S. It is also reported in Canada, Europe, South and Central America, and parts of Asia. Beekeepers around the world began to connect neonicotinoids to vanishing bees. Olivier Belval says massive bee loss began with the use of imidacloprid, which in France is sold as gaucho.
Alors, les premiers cas de dépopulation importante de colonies ont été constatés sur des floraisons de tournesol qui étaient traitées avec du gaucho. Et donc une partie importante des abeilles qui partaient de la colonie ne revenaient plus à la ruche.
In 2008, Germany's Der Spiegel reported massive bee deaths in some of the country's prime agricultural regions. While agriculture officials said the causes were unclear, many German beekeepers pointed a finger at clothianidin, which had been recently introduced in Germany as poncho.
I laid awake many nights thinking, what is going on here? Whoa, wait a minute. We changed our farming. We changed our chemical program. We've gone to systemics, neonicotinoids, And that's the period of time when they started to get more and more and more and more of this stuff started to be used.
Neonicotinoids are systemic pesticides that are absorbed by and become part of the plant, making all parts of it, including pollen, toxic to insects.
They are taken up by the vascular system of the plant and transferred to all portions of the plant, so that any insect that sucks or chews on that plant is affected by that insecticide.
It's a chemical that causes exposure constantly.
Neonicotinoids are related to nicotine and are neurotoxins, or nerve poisons, that attack insects' nervous systems, causing paralysis and eventually death.
Clothianidin is very toxic to bees, a level as low as 1/10 of a part per billion. 1 part per trillion can have an effect on the honeybees. And the modes of action are multiple. In some cases, they can kill the bees outright. In some cases, they can compromise their immune system. They can compromise their navigational ability, their memory.
They've been linked to disorientation, to the inability of bees to communicate, the inability of queen bees to reproduce, that is, produce the brood.
And they disrupt that delicate balance between the honeybee and its environment. They may fly out and die. They may fly out and not be able to find their way home again.
This is colony collapse disorder at its core.
The neonicotinoids imidacloprid and clothianidin, manufactured by the German chemical giant Bayer and registered for use in the U.S. by EPA, are widely used in commercial agriculture as well as home gardens. They are applied on crop seed, soil, and plant leaves. Engineered to be easier to use than older generation pesticides, they are also longer lasting and are thought to be less toxic to wildlife. But some scientists now say that neonicotinoids are more toxic to bees than the pesticides they replaced, and they linger in soil and water for years.
France banned imidacloprid in 1999, and Germany banned clothianidin 2 or 3 years later. It's also been banned in Slovenia and in Italy. And what we saw was a rebound of the bees in those countries.
But clothianidin is not banned in the United States. The Environmental Protection Agency is supposed to license or register pesticides if they meet standards for protection of the environment and human health.
The problem, however, is that EPA has cited a provision in our federal pesticide law that allows it to conditionally register pesticides. And it's that discretionary authority to allow pesticides on the market prior to having a full battery of tests to make safety determinations that is problematic.
This loophole allows companies to sell a pesticide before EPA gets all the safety data, and this is precisely what happened with clothianidin.
EPA registered the chemical without having full knowledge of what its impacts on bees would be, and said, we're going to design a study with the manufacturer Bayer, but in the meantime, we're going to allow this pesticide on the market.
In 2003, EPA scientists concerned about the toxicity of clothianidin wanted to test the effect of the pesticide on bees exposed to treated corn and canola seed in a natural setting. Instead, EPA allowed Bayer to market clothianidin first and complete the study on its own product a year later. By the end of 2004, the study was not done. Meanwhile, clothianidin was already in use on over 88 million acres of U.S. crops. Bayer finally completed the study in 2007. Initially, EPA said it was sound, but in 2010, the agency reversed itself and found the study to be deficient. Tom Theobald saw where it fell short.
The life cycle study consisted of putting 4 colonies of bees on 2.5 acres of crops treated, the seed treated with clothianidin. What is completely disregarded is the fact that a colony of bees will forage over several thousand acres. It was the key study upon which conditional registration was granted to clothianidin, and it has failed to satisfy the requirements of registration.
EPA called for a new field study, one that may take years to complete. The EPA told Earth Focus it is working to develop suitable designs for pollinator studies and will seek independent scientific peer review of proposed approaches for future pollinator studies, a process that will allow the agency to explore more rigorous testing of pesticides and their impacts to pollinators. But for some beekeepers, this may be too little, too late.
And this is where EPA is basically going wrong, because, they were created to protect the environment. Something has gotten in the way. I mean, we've gotten somewhere we got the cart before the horse.
When you take a situation where You know a chemical is highly toxic to a bee and bee colonies, and you allow that chemical to be put out into the marketplace without having complete answers to the impact that those chemicals are going to have on bee health and bee colony sustainability, you're not doing your job as a federal regulator.
I don't know why they're allowing clothianidin on the market. I have a suspicion, as any reasonable person would, and that is that it returns about $1 billion a year to the chemical industry.
The power and influence of the pesticide lobby is pervasive in D.C. That power is strong, that influence is quite strong, both in direct lobbying and actually in campaign contributions.
Those that have the vested interest and the money are able to influence the statutory and regulatory decisions that are made. And as a result, we end up with a system that doesn't ask about the essentiality of introducing these chemicals. Doesn't ask about, do we need these chemicals? It says we can create a threshold of acceptable hazard and then not worry about anything else.
EPA officials deny that neonicotinoids are responsible for colony collapse disorder and told Earth Focus, "We are aware of no data demonstrating that an EPA-registered pesticide used according to the label instructions caused colony collapse disorder." According to Bayer's subsidiary, Bayer Crop Science, it is widely agreed among scientists that disease and parasites as individual stressors and in combination are the most relevant factors in honeybee colony loss. The pesticide industry conducts or sponsors its own studies that show neonicotinoids do not have long-term effects on bees under natural or field conditions.
Bayer is taking a play straight out of the handbook of big tobacco. That is, we will continue to create enough uncertainty around an issue that nothing happens. So what they've said is that because we cannot conclusively say this pesticide, clothianidin, causes this XB death, we can not do anything about it. We need more and more and years of research before we can do anything. So big tobacco did this for years and years with cigarettes and secondhand tobacco. We now see the same thing with bees and pesticides.
While the link between colony collapse disorder and neonicotinoids has not been conclusively proven, over 100 independent studies not funded by the pesticide industry, show that neonicotinoids have acute, sublethal, and chronic effects on bees.
The body, the weight of evidence of studies that have come forward in the past several years fairly conclusively said that pesticides, both alone and in combination with other factors, are leading to this sudden bee decline or colony collapse disorder.
Two reports published in the March 2012 journal Science show what happens to bees exposed to levels of neonicotinoids found in field conditions. British researchers report bumblebees exposed to imidacloprid grew more slowly, and the number of queen bees produced fell by 85%. A French study showed that fewer honeybees made it back to their colony after exposure to the neonicotinoid cruiser. Honeybees come into contact with neonicotinoids through pollen and nectar.
But there's a third avenue called guttation. It's droplets that are exuded by the plant, usually in the morning, typical of corn, and the bees will use that as a moisture source. Those are very high in systemics and can kill the bees outright.
If you want to look at high-impact exposure and look at what could be causing this massive decline in colony health, you've got to look at contaminated corn, or corn that's treated with neonicotinoid pesticides.
At least 90% of the over 94 million acres of corn that were planted in the United States this year were treated with neonicotinoids. This is a substantial number, and it's on an upward trend. We see that these corn fields are one of the only places that bees can forage or find food.
You know, corn don't need bees. Unfortunately, corn has a lot of pollen. When corn pollinates in late July and August, corn pollen is flying through the air everywhere. You can go and watch a beehive that's not even sitting in the cornfield, bringing in corn pollen, because as that bee flies through the air, its hair on its body is like a magnet, and then it absorbs. That's the way it was developed, to go into that plant, take that pollen, get it on its hairs, move it from that plant to the next plant to cross-pollinate. So as that bee's flying through the air, or visiting the corn because the bee is looking for pollen, it's bringing back that pollen from that corn plant to the hive, loaded with lots of things.
Here we have a situation where, as with most pesticides, there's drift off the target site. And so with these neonicotinoids, what we're seeing is that actually the plants, it could be wildflowers, it could be dandelions, it could be plants along the side of the road, on the farm, by the farm, that are also picking up this chemical as a systemic and also expressing contaminated pollen.
Purdue University researchers recently found that dust exhausted from seed planting machinery carries highly concentrated doses of neonicotinoids that can be fatal to bees.
There's a lot of farmers out here today that really don't want that stuff. But they have no choices because, that's the way the system has become.
When most farmers now go to actually purchase seeds from a seed supplier, they now are forced to buy seed that's been treated with these products.
This is a money-making thing. It's what's good for the seed company and the pesticide company that's making the product.
Unfortunately, insurance companies, banks, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture has promoted this acceleration of the use of pesticides on corn. They've actually created blanket insurance policies that make it easier and actually promote the use of wide-scale use of neonicotinoid pesticides. In fact, farmers can't get as good of insurance policies or rates unless they apply them.
The farmers become serfs to the system. They're working for the company store. If they use these products for more than a few years, they now have a soil that's virtually inert. If they want to grow anything, they have to go to the chemical companies for the seed, for the herbicide, for the pesticide, for the fertilizer, and if they have a crop, who do they sell it to? This is the old company store model on a grand scale.
Unless the EPA is given the opportunity and faces increased public pressure, it's unlikely that the agency will take the necessary steps to protect our bees.
And public pressure to protect the bees is growing.
Recently, over 250,000 people from across the country sent a clear message to the Environmental Protection Agency that they need to take immediate action to phase out or suspend the use of these neonicotinoid pesticides, specifically clothianidin. Now, that message from EPA back is, we're not listening.
La solution pour nous, elle est simple, c'est interdire ces produits sur les plantes visitées par les abeilles.
The precautionary principle is a principle that's followed in most of the European countries and most of the other countries, and it means that we err on the side of caution. That a chemical is not released to the market until its safety is assured. Here in the United States, it seems to be the other way around, and what the EPA and the chemical companies have done is they have turned the environment into the experiment, and the people have become the guinea pigs. We're the experimental animals.
These are a symptom of something larger. That's a broken federal regulatory system that fails to provide necessary protections for us and our food.
We're on a crash course with our existence. I think that the bees and the demise of the bees are that message to us.
Are my grandkids and their kids going to be reaping this, or are we going to be able to fix it for them? That's, I don't have an answer.
Now, who has the answer to this? No doubt it's our Lord Jesus Christ. If he told us there was going to be famines, if he told us there was going to be disease, and we see the very things in front of us, either you believe it or you don't. And if you believe it, then the light that God has shined through his word will penetrate in you and around you. And that light will direct you right to the Lord Jesus Christ for his salvation. But there's more. Let's go and see some more evidence of the bee population continuing to die off. And before I go to the next news source, I want to say this. One thing in the video that they were talking about, both videos talked about, that the bee population has been dying off for some time. And in the first video, they said after the Second World War. Well, we know from Scripture that Jesus Christ told us that we were going to see all these signs, all of these things were going to be happening in one generation. And in Matthew chapter 24, he talks about the fig tree, which is Israel. And when the fig tree is young and putteth forth the leaves, you know that summer is nigh. And in that chapter, he said, that generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Now, the war ended, the Second War ended. And right after that, the bee population started to die off. And let's keep in mind, in 1948, soon after the war had ended, we know the bee population started to die off. It started to die off with the rebirth of the nation of Israel. And it was the nation of Israel which was going to be a very specific sign that you have entered into the last generation. So seeing the bee population dying off as we're seeing all of these other signs, it just shows us we're very close. And the answer is in the word of the Lord. So what I'm going to do now is give you some other documentation, more recent documentation about the bees dying off.
It's the sound of bees. The world's bee population is in crisis, and that puts our entire food supply at risk. Now, there's growing concern that some pesticides being used right here in BC are a big part of the problem.
Peter Granger explains.
There's some activity.
Richmond beekeeper Brian Campbell is checking his hives.
This is the honey here, and there's a comb.
Campbell needs to see if his bees are producing enough honey to survive the winter.
More bees, the better.
Like many honey producers across Canada, Campbell has noticed a sharp decline in the number of bees, which pollinate 35% of the food we eat. Like many beekeepers, Campbell believes a relatively new set of insecticides introduced in the 1990s called neonicotinoids is to blame for massive bee kills across Canada and around the world.
We do need to have greater controls and restrictions on the use of these pesticides until we understand, well, what are the short and long-term effects that they're having on bee populations.
BC bees are facing many of the same stressors that bees all over the world are. Climate change, disease, and pests are making things bad. They're made even worse by pesticides. And that's why environmentalists would like to see Health Canada ban the chemicals.
We've got disappearing bees, and we've got these neonicotinoids, which are now the most widespread insecticide on the face of the planet.
Joe Foy runs one of 5 environmental groups asking Health Canada to reverse its recent decision to reapprove neonicotinoids. Health Canada hasn't responded to our questions. Earlier this year, the European Union severely restricted neonicotinoids to protect these pollinators, perhaps considering what Albert Einstein once said: if the bee disappeared off the face of the earth, man would only have 4 years left to live. Peter Granger, CTV News, Richmond.
This news was taken by Channel 3, June 19th of 2014.
Well, the side effect of the drought that you probably haven't considered, these extremely dry conditions aren't just taking a toll on people. Honeybees are hurting as well. News Channel 3's Tracy Laird joins us live from Santa Barbara with the story. And Tracy, we could see a domino effect if there are fewer beehives this year.
Absolutely, that's what beekeepers are saying. And I'm here on the Santa Barbara Mesa by the Douglas Family Preserve, and this is an area where bees usually thrive, but bees are having a difficult time due to the drought. It's easier to hear the birds than the bees these days. but if you listen closely, you can hear the buzz.
What we have here is the bees are fanning the entrance to the hive right now.
Paul Cronshaw of the Santa Barbara Beekeepers Association says bees need water to stay alive.
If the hive gets too hot, they will come out here and form a beard. So it's just starting to form a little bit of a beard right now. The bees are bringing water, they're bringing some nectar in, and they're bringing, of course, pollen.
The problem is the drought.
In 40 years I've kept bees, I've had no honey to give away as Christmas presents this year.
And you may notice a difference in prices for honey at the store. It's up 7% since the beginning of the year, or about $6 a pound. Reporting live in Santa Barbara, Tracy Lair, News Channel 3.
Now, as I said before, the reports just keep coming in. This one was from June 19th of 2014. Bumblebee die-off in Eugene under investigation. Oregon regulators are investigating the first mass die-off of the year. Residents of North Eugene apartment complex found sidewalks littered with dead and dying bees on Tuesday. So it keeps happening. Now, here's one thing to consider. What happens if the farmers stop spraying their fields with insecticide? Well, it's obvious that the insects will move in and destroy the crop, so it's a double-edged sword. And so far, the scientists haven't come up with a good way to take care of the problem, so you can expect it to continue.
Well, nationwide, the honeybee population is dying off. Here in Pennsylvania, it's roughly half of what it was last year alone. WTAJ News reporter Allie Ingersoll live in State College with a look at why. Allie?
John, this winter, 44% of the state's bee population died off. Researchers say cold weather was a factor, but something man-made is also playing a big role.
I think one of the key factors is the heavy use of pesticides.
Marianne Frazier is a senior extension associate at Penn State where she studies honeybees.
We are losing a lot of forage area for bees.
At the bee lab, she and her lab technicians are researching how pesticides impact the bees.
We'll check their colony demographics, and then we'll just kind of tease it apart and see which pesticides and which adjuvants, formulants, whatever, led to different results.
We're trying to find ways to be effective at controlling pests, protecting pollinators, and again, using less pesticides so we have abundant food.
Mark McDonald is the owner of Bee Tree Farm. He says the reason why he doesn't use pesticides is simple.
I live here. I eat here.
He says bees are essential for success on his farm.
We use bees as pollinators. Like everyone else, they do a great job on the flowers, vital to our crops. Not just honeybees, but native bees as well. They're all important.
Frazier and McDonald say the decline in the honeybee population impacts everyone.
They do the job of pollinating those crops, and that's what results in the seed or the fiber in the case of cotton, or the fruits and vegetables that people enjoy eating so much. And so if we don't have those pollinators, worst case scenario is we don't have those foods, or we have shortages of those foods.
Look what's going on with this insect that is constantly traveling into our neighborhood, where we eat, where we produce, where we live, and look what's happening to it. So maybe the same thing's happening to us, and we just don't know yet.
Frazier says people at home can play their part by reducing the amount of herbicides they use on their lawn. Reporting live in State College, Allie Ingersoll, WTAJ News.
So that's going to conclude the section about the bees dying off. And now I want to get back to the food prices going up and some of the reasons why. You'll see the drought, and as I said, and the increased intensity of the sun. Take a look at this report. You see on the left, food prices on the rise. From June 2006 to 2007, you see the increase right here, how much they're going up, and it's quite a bit. And this is just from 2006 through 2007. I'm going to be showing you videos from each year showing you that the prices over the years that I've been telling the people who have been coming to my prophecy post or have been coming to my lectures, that each year the prices are going to go up, and why they're going to go up. And that's exactly what's taken place. So let's take a look at this first report. Record high world food prices to keep rising.
The
United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization says global food prices are likely to rise even higher after hitting records in January, and this raises concern for many countries.
Global food prices rose in January at a record high. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization said on Thursday that food prices went above 2008 peaks when rising food prices sparked riots. Many countries could be affected by food price inflation, and some don't expect the food price hike to ease for some time.
The issue that concerns is that the duration of this price increase, which started so many months ago and not really giving us any indication it's going to change dramatically in the future, coming months, is long. And this long duration is something that I think eventually would mean more food inflation in many countries.
Up for the 7th month in a row, the index was the highest since records began in 1990 and topped in June 2008 during the food crisis of 2007-2008. Surging food prices have fueled protests that toppled Tunisia's president in January and have spilled over to Egypt and Jordan. Severe drought in the Black Sea last year, heavy rains in Australia, and dry weather in Argentina, and anticipation of the spike in demand after unrest in North Africa and the Middle East has caused grain prices to rise steeply. High food prices are of major concern, especially for countries that face problems in financing food imports and for poor households which spend a large share of their income on food.
All right, so that's going to be the end of part 1. Please go to my website. I'm going to list part 1, part 2, and probably part 3, one after the other. And again, that would be www.endtimesresearchministry.com. This is Frank DeMora saying thank you for allowing me to come into your home and present the Word of the Lord and His documentation through current events.